She was asleep against my shoulder, one hand curled into the collar of my shirt, breathing slow and even, and I had absolutely no memory of how she'd gotten there. My first thought wasn't panic. It was that her hair smelled like the lavender detergent from the laundromat 2 blocks over, and that thought scared me more than waking up next to her ever could. I lay still, staring at the ceiling of my own bedroom, running through the last 12 hours like a man checking an alibi. Wren Ashford had moved into the spare room of my apartment 6 weeks earlier after a rental agency glitch put both our names on the same lease. Neither of us had signed up for a roommate. We'd signed up for a one-bedroom that turned out to have 2 names attached to it, a landlord who refused to void either contract, and a housing market brutal enough that walking away meant homelessness for one of us. So we'd made it work. We split the bathroom schedule, alternated grocery runs, and on the second night, she'd stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed and said, "Just so we're clear, we're only roommates," like she was daring me to argue. I hadn't argued. 6 weeks later, I was staring at the ceiling with her asleep on my chest, trying to figure out how the rule had broken without either of us noticing. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is that I ran a letterpress print shop 3 blocks from that apartment, the kind of place that still used century-old machines to stamp wedding invitations and business cards on a thick cotton paper, and that I understood something most people never had to learn: spacing. In printing, it's called kerning, the gap between letters. Too tight, and the words blur into a smear no one can read. Too loose, and the sentence falls apart before it reaches the eye. I'd spent a decade learning exactly how much space a message needed to survive. I had never once figured out how to apply that to my own life. And now there was a woman asleep against my ribs who'd apparently walked through that lesson without waking either of us up. I eased my arm out from under her, and she stirred, murmuring something I couldn't catch. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused, then widened all at once. "Oh my God." She sat up so fast the blanket slid off her shoulders. "Oh my God, why am I in your bed?" "I was hoping you could tell me." Wren pressed both hands to her face. Even panicked, even at 6 in the morning with her hair a wreck and her t-shirt twisted sideways, she had the kind of face that made silence feel like a waste of a good opportunity to look at her. Dark eyes, a scatter of freckles across her nose that only showed in direct light, a mouth that curved down when she was thinking hard and up when she'd caught herself doing it. I'd noticed all of this weeks ago and filed it under things a roommate should not notice. "I don't remember coming in here," she said. "I don't remember anything after I went to sleep." "You didn't say anything?" "Knock. Ask if it was okay." Would I have knocked if I was asleep? That stopped me. I looked at her more carefully, and something in her expression had shifted from embarrassment into something closer to fear. "Wren, has this happened before?" She didn't answer right away, which was its own answer. Finally, she pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them like she was bracing for cold. "When I was a teenager, after my dad got sick, I used to sleepwalk. My mom found me in the backyard once, standing at the fence like I was waiting for someone. It stopped after he died. I thought it was gone." "When's the anniversary?" Her jaw tightened. "Yesterday." I understood then. Grief has its own gravity, and hers had apparently pulled her 15 feet down a hallway and into a bed that wasn't hers, looking for something her sleeping mind remembered needing, and her waking mind had locked away behind a rule she'd made up on our second night together. "We're only roommates." I wondered, watching her sit there hugging her knees, whether she'd made that rule for my benefit or for her own. "I'm sorry," she said. "This is humiliating." "It's not humiliating. You were grieving in your sleep. That's not a crime. It's still weird." "Sure. But so is the fact that I woke up more worried about you than about the fact that a woman I've known for 6 weeks was asleep on my chest." The sentence left my mouth before I'd fully decided to say it, and I watched it land on her the way a dropped glass lands on tile. That half-second of suspended silence before everything shatters or somehow doesn't. "You're not supposed to say things like that," she said quietly. "Why not?" "Because we agreed. Roommates. You agreed." I just didn't argue because the lease was already a mess and I didn't want to make it messier. I sat up against the headboard, putting a few careful inches between us, the kind of distance that felt deliberate rather than cold. For what it's worth, I've been failing at the roommate thing for about 3 weeks now. Her eyes flicked to mine. Failing how? I started leaving the good coffee out for you instead of hiding it. I learned which drawer you keep your paints in, so I stopped slamming it by accident. I noticed you hum off-key when you're happy and stop entirely when you're not. And somewhere along the way I started listening for it every time you walked through the door. I shrugged, aiming for casual and missing by a mile. That's not roommate behavior. I just didn't know how to say it without breaking the one rule you actually cared about. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me the way she studied the canvases stacked against her bedroom wall, the ones she never let me see finished. Ren painted commission murals for restaurants and small businesses around town, the kind of work that paid unevenly and demanded everything anyway. I liked that about her before I liked anything else, the way she chose something unstable because it mattered more than something safe. I've been failing too, she admitted. I told myself the roommate thing was about being practical, splitting a lease neither of us wanted. But somewhere around week 2, I started painting because I needed an excuse to be in the living room when you got home from the shop, smelling like ink and paper, looking like you'd spent all day making something out of nothing. She laughed, short and disbelieving at herself. I built an entire rule specifically so I wouldn't have to admit that. So why'd you build it? Her humor faded. Because the last person I let get close destroyed something in me I'm still rebuilding. And I promised myself I wouldn't hand anyone the pieces again until I trusted my own judgment. And I didn't trust it. Not with you. You were too easy to fall for, which made you dangerous. I understood that kind of danger. 2 years earlier, I'd watched someone I loved choose a life 3 states away without once asking whether I wanted to come. And I'd spent the following year rebuilding a print shop out of the wreckage of a relationship, learning that some things only survive if you set the spacing right the first time. I hadn't trusted my own judgment either. Maybe that was why the rule had worked on me for 6 weeks, why I'd let it sit between us like a wall neither of us built alone. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I know that doesn't mean much from a guy you've known for 6 weeks. It means more than you think. She uncurled slightly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Can I tell you something else humiliating? Please. I've known for a while that I sleepwalk when I'm grieving something I haven't dealt with. I think some part of me needed to walk into your room last night, even if the rest of me built a rule to keep me out. The morning light had shifted while we talked, moving gold across the wall, and somewhere below us the city was waking up, buses hissing to a stop, someone's dog barking at the mail carrier, ordinary noise carrying on without any idea that something in this room had just quietly rearranged itself. I reached over and took her hand, the one still curled against her knee, and she let me. So what happens now? She asked. Now I take you to breakfast, and we stop pretending the rule still means anything. She smiled, small and real. That's it. No grand declaration. I already told you the coffee thing. I'm saving the grand declaration for when you're less likely to think it's the grief talking. We didn't kiss that morning. We got breakfast at the diner on the corner, sat across from each other instead of side by side, and talked for 2 hours about nothing important, which turned out to be everything important. It was 3 days later, standing in my shop while she waited for a proof to dry on the letterpress, that she finally closed the distance herself, reaching up and kissing me with the ink smell of the shop still clinging to both our clothes. And I remember thinking that whatever spacing had existed between us before, we'd finally set it right. 3 months in, we weren't hiding anything anymore. She kept a shelf of paint supplies in what used to be the spare room, though she rarely used the room for sleeping. I'd taught her to run the smaller press, and she'd taught me that murals took the same patience as typesetting, that you had to trust the whole picture even when you were only working on one corner of it. Her sleepwalking never happened again, not once, as though her body had simply stopped needing to wander now that she'd found her way to where she wanted to be while awake. Then the email came. She read it standing in the kitchen, coffee going cold in her hand, and I knew from the stillness in her shoulders that it wasn't good news dressed as bad news, or bad news dressed as good. It was complicated news, the kind that doesn't announce itself as either. A gallery in Chicago wants to commission a full building, she said. 6 months, maybe longer. It's the biggest thing anyone's ever offered me. I set down my own mug carefully, the way you set down something you don't want to break by accident. That's incredible. It's 6 months in Chicago. I heard that part too. She looked up at me, and I saw the old fierce surface again, the one that had built a rule out of self-protection weeks before either of us admitted what we wanted. I don't want to build a wall around this the way I did before, so I'm just going to say it. I'm scared that if I take this, I'll lose what we just started building. And if you don't take it, then I spend the rest of my life wondering whether I let fear make the decision instead of talent. I thought about the print shop, about the machines I'd spent a decade learning, about how none of it would collapse if I closed the doors for a few months and figured out how to run a smaller version of my business from 400 miles away. I thought about the year I'd spent guarding myself so carefully that I nearly missed a woman sleepwalking her way into the one room in the apartment where she actually wanted to be. Take it, I said, and I'll figure out how to keep the shop running from wherever you need me to be for a while. We built something real in 6 weeks by accident. I'm not scared of what we can build on purpose. Her eyes filled, and this time neither of us pretended it was about the coffee going cold. If you've ever had a roommate situation turn into something you never planned for, tell me about it. Drop your first name, your age, and the city or country you're watching from, because I read every single one of these, and I love knowing exactly who's sitting with us for a story like this one. She took the Chicago commission. I spent 4 months splitting my time between Asheville and a rented studio space near her gallery site, learning to run proofs on a portable press while she painted 20-foot walls one color at a time. We fought over logistics more than either of us expected, argued about flights and schedules, and whose turn it was to fly, and every single time, we chose to stay in it instead of retreating behind old rules built out of fear. A year after that first morning, the one where I woke up and found her asleep against my shoulder with no memory of how she got there, I flew to Chicago to see the finished mural. She stood beside me in front of it, 20 feet of color depicting a print shop window at golden hour, a woman's silhouette reflected faintly in the glass beside a man's, close enough to almost be touching. I painted us before I admitted it was us, she said. I reached into my jacket, because I'd been carrying the ring for 3 weeks, waiting for the right spacing, the right moment where the message would land clean instead of blurred. Ren Ashford, I've spent a year learning that some rules are only built to protect us until we're brave enough to break them. I don't want a roommate anymore. I want the whole life. She said yes before I finished kneeling, laughing and crying at the same time, right there in front of the mural she'd painted of us before either of us knew what we were building. We got married the following spring in the print shop itself, chairs set between the presses, her mural printed small and framed above the door where every visitor would see it first. Sometimes she still teases me about that first morning, about the rule she built and broke in her sleep before either of us was brave enough to break it awake. I tell her every time that some doors only open because something in us already knew which room we belonged in, long before we let ourselves walk through it on purpose. What would you have done if you woke up and found the person you swore was just a roommate asleep in your arms with no memory of how they got there? Tell me your story in the comments below. And if you want more nights like this one, we've opened up memberships where you get brand new exclusive stories every single week, completely ad-free. If this one kept you here till the end, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.